Welcome back once again to F1 Brake Check, you little speed maniacs. 21 days. We have 21 days until F1 teams return to action for preseason testing in Bahrain. Today, Corey and I will be discussing the evolution of F1 teams along with the latest news and rumors. So join us as we break it all down with the insight or lack thereof that Corey and I can provide. Buckle up and stay in the clean air as F1 Brake Check screams to life for another episode.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
Welcome back to F1 Brake Check. My name is Scott Vick. I am one of your intrepid hosts, and with me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Mr. Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing, my friend?
Good. Yeah. Next week, I actually have to go up to balmy Minnesota. It's going to be.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that.
So the people that actually live in Minnesota are saying that next week is supposed to be the coldest week of the entire year.
Yeah.
This is my
Be prepared because
jacket. You're looking at my thickest jacket at the moment. I'm not going to go buy another one.
You're
going to go.
I was going to say, you need to go hit the Columbia store then before, shameless plug for Columbia. You need to go hit the Columbia store before you head out there because my mother's side of the family all lives up just across the state line in North Dakota. And the coldest I have ever been was when we went up there one year for Christmas, and it was just bone-jarringly cold. I mean, when we talk about cold here, in Texas or even in Oklahoma, we're talking, the coldest most of the time that it gets, ever is maybe mid-20s. I mean, I'm talking there, it's like below zero and stays that way for days on end.
Yeah.
So you're in for a real shock, my friend.
Yeah, it's going to be less than fun.
Yes. And next week I get to go to not balmy Vegas, but
Nice.
going to Las Vegas next week, for work as well. And
Right.
I was looking at the weather forecast this morning that it's like the high next week is like in the 50s in Vegas. So
Wow, nice, man. And it's
yeah,
50 Fahrenheit.
so it shouldn't be 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So it shouldn't be too bad at all.
I would much rather swap positions with you.
All right, so this week we have kind of a different take on our history section of the episode. So this week we're going to be playing kind of a reverse Stump the Pundit, which fortunately our Stump the Pundit section will be returning in a couple weeks when we get ready to talk about the preseason testing when our new season starts. But we're going to kind of do a reverse Stump the Pundit where I've got some questions for Corey, and we're going to be talking about the evolution of the 10 F1 teams that we currently have, where they started, how they got where they're at, or how they got to where they're at today. So, Corey, for you, question number one: how many teams currently on the grid have had the same name since their inception?
Just Ferrari, right?
Actually, no. There are 4 teams that started off that have only had one name ever. Ferrari, so you got that one right. McLaren, Williams, and Haas.
Haas too. Okay. I thought Haas was by somebody else and then became
No.
Okay.
Haas was started by Gene Haas and was granted their place on the grid as a brand new privateer team.
All right. Right on.
All right. So question number 2, which of the current teams has had the most iterations since their inception?
Let me think about that. So Red Bulls obviously had a few. Mercedes has had a few. Renault or Alpine now? I'm going to go with Alpine.
That's one of them. There's actually 2.
Yeah.
There are 2 teams that have had 6 iterations in their history. So the first one, like you said, that you got was Alpine, which began as the Tolman team,
Yeah.
which was most notable for, which was started by a uh, trucking magnate uh, named Tolman, and they're most notable for being the team that gave Ayrton Senna his start. So later on, after Ayrton left the team, the Benetton family, who had been a sponsor of teams in F1, bought the Tolman team and rebranded it as Benetton Grand Prix. Then later on, while it was still under the direction of Flavio Briatore, he brought in the Renault engines
Mhm.
during the 95 season, because the previous season in 94, they had been using Ford customer engines, but having seen the power that the Williams had with the Renault V10 in the back, he was able to talk Renault into taking on a second works team in Benetton. And then later on, Renault, who had once upon a time had been a full constructor in Formula One, they built both their own cars and their own engines, most notably in the turbo era,
Mhm.
decided that now that, they wanted to go from being just a engine supplier to a full constructor again. And so they bought the Renault, or I'm sorry, Renault bought the Benetton team, and they ran it for a while. And then at one point there was a very short period where they were rebranded as Lotus. It was still a Renault uh, power unit. It was still the engine, or the chassis were still built in the same factory in England, but they were rebranded as Lotus because of a spot, but not because of any connection to the Lotus team owned by Colin Chapman, who had its glory days in the 60s and 70s. This was just simply a branding deal because at that point, the Lotus name had been bought by a Chinese company, and they were rebranded as Lotus for a short period of time before they reverted back to Renault. And then I think it was 3 years ago that they rebranded themselves from Renault to Alpine,
Yeah,
which
Alpine.
Alpine was a subsidiary company
Mhm.
of Renault, who was known more for their sports cars. And so, in order to take and try to, you know, make more brand awareness of their sports cars, which Alpine builds the brilliant A110, which if we ever get that in America, I'm going to buy one. I don't
Yeah.
care how much it costs, because they
Nice.
are absolutely brilliant cars.
Wow.
So that was the evolution of Alpine. And then the other one is Aston Martin, who began life as the very well-known Jordan Grand Prix, which
Yep.
was the brainchild of Eddie Jordan, who had been absolutely dominating in the lower tiers, decided that he wanted to go make the move up to F1. And so back then, we've talked about this before. Back then, in the early 90s, the late 80s, early 90s, just anyone could show up with a car so long as it fit within the rules, and so long as it, was able to qualify within 110% of the fastest time. Anybody could show up. Well, okay, and I take that back. There's one more thing: that they had to be able to produce two cars. So a team couldn't show up with just one car and expect to participate in the Grand Prix weekend. But as long as you could produce two cars and they fit within the rules of F1, any team could show up on any given weekend and race. So Eddie Jordan decides to make the jump to F1 and starts Jordan Grand Prix, which started out with it on a shoestring budget, but had the brilliant Gary Anderson, who produced and we've talked about this before in a previous episode when we talked about the most beautiful cars that ever
Yeah.
produced in Formula One. He produced the absolutely beautiful but also aerodynamically efficient and absolutely brilliant Jordan 191, and the Jordan team for many years took and punched way above their weight. They were, for many, many years, they were always, middle of midfield, but they were always, knocking on that door, because there were some weekends where they were just blindingly fast, but either through, bad luck or what have you, they didn't get that first maiden win until probably I want to say it was like 7 years into their 8 years. Sorry, 8 years when Damon Hill took the absolutely brilliant win at Spa, where they actually had not only took their first win but their first 1-2 finish at Spa in the rain when Damon Hill put on an absolute masterclass. So then, fast forward a few more years, and the team was purchased from Eddie Jordan and branded as Midland. And for a lot of people outside of England and Europe, Midland was a car manufacturer that very well-known English car manufacturer who suddenly decided, and as the brand had kind of fallen on hard times and everything, and so then, some I forget his name, some guy came in, he bought the company and was trying to bring it back into its glory, and so he bought the Jordan Grand Prix team, renamed it as Midland. Was an utter disaster. The team never got anywhere even close to the kind of success that that Jordan had, albeit moderate, and very modest success. They never got anywhere even close. So then another very famous English sports car builder, Spiker, then took and bought the team, and within about 2 years, completely drove it into the ground. So along comes another billionaire. So along comes Vijay Malaya. And I know I'm mispronouncing that, so I apologize. But he was a Indian billionaire who was best known as the owner of Kingfisher beer. So if you've ever had a Kingfisher, you're well aware with Vijay's uh, claim to fame, if you will. So he takes and he buys the remnants of Spiker and rebrands the team as Force India. And they raced underneath a Indian license for under the name Force India, and later Sahara Force India, with Kingfisher Beer being a very large sponsor of the team. And then they were one of their most notable claims to fame, though, was the after a short stint at Williams, Lance Stroll became a driver for Force India using Lawrence Stroll's money. And then Lawrence Stroll later decides that he wants to be more involved in Formula One. So he takes it, he buys Force India, which at that point had kind of fallen on the VJ fallen on hard times. He was being indicted in India for fraud and a bunch of other charges and things like
Ouch.
that. And yeah, so it was not, so while he was having all these problems, Lawrence Stroll came in, bought the team. They renamed it for a time as Racing Point. And then Lawrence Stroll, on a buying spree, takes and decides to buy Aston Martin. And because of their road car manufacturing, and also because of Aston Martin's long racing history in sports cars, and he rebrands the team as Aston Martin, which is where they got to be where they're at today. In question number one, so now on question number three, we talked about Haas being one of the only teams that's had the same name its entire lifespan. Haas is also the team with the shortest history on the F1 grid. After Haas, which is the next shortest tenured team in F1?
Alfa Romeo's been there for a while, so it's not Alfa. Or they dropped in and out a few times. God, man, I'm stumped. I don't know.
Okay. Believe it or not, because of all their success, it was Red Bull.
Really? Yeah.
So, yes. So in 1998, the great Sir Jackie Stewart and his son Paul Stewart who, much like Jordan, had a very, very successful teams in the lower tiers of Formula Racing. Most notably, because Paul Stewart, Jackie's son, had a very successful career in racing in the lower tiers, but knew that he was just never going to be able to quite make that jump into the top tier.
Mhm.
So he decides to become a team owner. So working with his father as a partner, they take and start Stewart Grand Prix. And so Stewart entered Formula One as the factory works team for Ford, who had decided to renew, because up until that point, Ford had been strictly a engine supplier, and it was also pretty much in name only, because the engines were all built and produced and designed by Cosworth, which is an English engine manufacturer. And then Ford just simply put their name on it and provided some, money to them as, for like research and development
Mhm.
and stuff like that, with the expectation of they would get that research and development information back from Cosworth, which they could take later, put into their road cars. But they decided that they wanted to be more of a full-on engine supplier in Formula One. And so in partnership with Stewart Grand Prix, Ford entered the picture. A couple years later, Ford decides that, okay, we want to be much more involved as a full constructor. So they bought out the Stewart's share of Stewart Grand Prix and became the full owners of the team. Now, at that time, though, Ford also owned the Jaguar brand. And so they took and they renamed, and because at that time, Formula One was still a very European and Asia specific, and still didn't have a big audience in the US, nothing like what it has now. Back then, it's compared to now, back then, their audience in the US was minuscule. And so they decided to rename the team as Jaguar in order to, cater to their European and Asia and South America audiences. So then, but then after a couple of, Stewart had some, kind of like Jordan, they had some moderate success. They sometimes would, be knocking on the door of the top four, but never quite got over that hump. Well, once Jaguar took over and Ford became the manager of the team, things went downhill. And then, after a couple of disastrous years, they took, most notably, for some very awful shunts and everything. Most notably in Brazil in, I think it was 2006, if I remember correctly. Um, so Ford decides to take and get out of Formula One altogether. And at the time, Red Bull was a very heavily involved in Formula One as a sponsor, and they decided at that point that with the troubles that Jaguar were having and Ford looking for a buyer, they decided that they were going to go from just a sponsor to a full-on team owner, and so they became Red Bull Racing, which in so that's how we got to the evolution of where Red Bull came in now.
Right.
All right, next question. How many names has Sauber had before becoming Audi next year?
Gonna say four.
You are correct. But the weird thing is, though, is that the evolution of Sauber is quite funny, because the team was started by Peter Sauber, who had a very successful racing team in sports cars. They were most notable for fielding Mercedes sports cars, in sports prototypes in like at Le Mans, and in endurance racing, and decided to make that jump to Formula One using Mercedes power. So they joined the grid just I think it was 2 years after Jordan joined Formula One. Sauber joined Formula One. Then fast forward to 2008, 2009, BMW, who had been the engine supplier for Williams, decided that they wanted to become a full constructor, much like, at this point, Renault had already done, and, Ferrari and Jaguar. So they decide that they want to be one. So they take and they buy out the Sauber team, and it becomes Sauber BMW, and then later on just BMW. So BMW takes and participates in Formula One for 4 years, and then decide kind of like what shortly after, Jaguar had already pulled out, and they decide that they want out of Formula One, so they leave and they sell all of the assets back to Peter Sauber. So the name reverts back to Sauber Grand
Oh,
Prix.
yeah.
And then for a couple of years, Alfa Romeo decides to do kind of a branding deal, kind of like what Lotus did with the Benetton, Renault, Alpine team had done. So Alfa does a branding, and so the team is renamed as Alfa Romeo Sauber F1. And so then, fast forward a couple of years, Alfa Romeo decides to end the branding partnership, and the name reverts back to what? Sauber Grand Prix, or later on, Kick
Yeah,
Sauber Grand
right, right,
Prix.
right. Which is
But now
almost as
this
bad.
assets,
It's
I'm
almost as
sorry?
bad as VCarb.
Yes, almost.
Almost. VCarb still has the number one spot as horrible names.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, but then it takes and it reverted back to Sauber, Kick Sauber Grand Prix. And then as we've already talked about a number of times on this podcast, with Audi deciding to, take a buy a very large stake, and then later on deciding to take a full ownership stake in Sauber Grand Prix, and the team will be renamed as Audi Grand Prix starting next season in 2026. Even
Right.
though they've pretty much taken over the day-to-day management, it'll still race under the Sauber banner for 2025, and then move to Audi Grand Prix in 2026, when they also start producing their own power units under the 2026 regulations.
Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
Okay, so yes, it will be. Okay, so before being purchased by Red Bull, who was the owner of Racing Bulls, and how many wins did they have?
I don't know. I have no idea, man.
So it was the much loved but the perennial underdog Minardi. So Minardi entered Formula One racing in the mid 80s as another Italian team. They were based out of San Marino province in Italy, near the Imola racetrack. And they raced basically on a shoestring budget. They were a perennial backmarker, but they were also noted for giving a huge number of future Formula One driving superstars, their start. Alonso did his first
Oh,
races at Minardi. Sebastian Vettel did his first races at Minardi. Um, so and the list goes on and on. So then, after Red Bull had bought uh, Jaguar, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, they decided that they also wanted to take and have a junior team, because this was about the time that they really kind of started the whole racing academy notion. That some of the other teams had certain individuals that they had invested in for
okay.
to help their careers along, but they didn't have the true driver academies like they do now. Red Bull's really the kind of the one who started all of
Hmm.
that in the,
Interesting.
at least was in the form that we know of them now. And so, but Red Bull, in an effort to take and try to, nurture young talent, to give them a chance to come into the sport, get a taste of F1, but not have the pressure of being a front running team like they, would be, at Red Bull. So they took and they bought the Minardi team, invested in it heavily, and renamed it as Toro Rosso, which is in Italian is Red Bull, Toro being bull,
Mhm.
Rosso being red. But that way they were also able to stay true to Minardi's Italian heritage going forward. So fast forward a couple of years, it's still the same team, still the same ownership, but then it gets renamed as AlphaTauri, which was a clothing brand that was
Yeah.
started by Red Bull, that they would sell clothing that was, Red Bull. Initially, it was Red Bull branded clothing, and then later on became its own fashion line in and of its own self.
Have you ever
And
seen any
then,
of it?
and
Have you
I'm
seen
sorry.
any of their line?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah. It's some very, it,
Eclectic.
yes, it's very eclectic and it's very European, if you will, because for the people, for us here in the US, there the European fashions, that is kind of the norm over there really doesn't play very well over here. And their collection is very what we in America would call very Eurocentric.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yep. And then, so then, they run under the AlphaTauri brand for, a couple of years and then decide last year to, rename themselves because they now had a branding tie-in with Visa and the Cash App, which is an app for bill paying and things like that here in the States, that they were trying to make a push into Europe and everything. And so they renamed themselves as Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, which,
Again,
like we just talked about, and we've talked about, when they first did the rebranding, stupidest name ever. I mean,
oh,
there's been some dumb names in Formula
yeah.
One, with some of the branding, deals and things like that, but it is definitely up there as one of the worst.
Yeah.
All right. So, which team has the most constructors championships that are no longer on the grid?
Oh man, it's before my time, bud.
So that would be the late Colin Chapman's Lotus, who have 7 constructors championships in Formula One.
I didn't realize they had that many. I knew about Lotus,
Mhm.
but I didn't know that they had that many.
Yep, seven world champion, 7 constructors championships over a span of about 20 something years.
Wow.
Yep. All right. Bonus question. And I think you're probably going to know this one because this one's kind of a trick, but it's also kind of a trick question. So, what was the only team to win the constructors championship in their very first season?
And besides Ferrari?
Well, no, because Ferrari didn't win the constructors championship in 1950 because there was
Oh,
actually no constructors championship until 1954.
gotcha. Okay.
And they didn't win the first constructors championship.
Yeah, you got me on the history, man. I don't know.
Okay. So that would be Braun,
Braun GP.
but
Yeah.
Braun GP. But like I said, that's kind of a trick question because it was the first year under the ownership of Ross Braun, but it was actually born out of the BAR Honda
Hmm.
team, which later on was bought out and when Honda became the full constructor and took ownership of the team. And then famously, Ross Braun bought the team from Honda when they wanted to pull out of Formula One during the 2008 global recession. And he bought the team for a pound, a British pound. He bought the entire assets of the team. But it actually is, so that's kind of a trick question because Braun wasn't truly a brand new team and they were only in Formula One for 1 year because then they were famously bought by Mercedes, who
Yep.
were the engine supplier for Braun GP. And we all know what happened once
Yeah,
Mercedes took over
exactly.
the team.
Yeah.
But you have to go back even further in the team's history that it was actually Tyrrell Grand Prix, which we talked about. Ken Tyrrell, the owner of Tyrrell Grand Prix, he had the company, since the late 1960s, which later became BAR, which later became Honda, which was then Braun GP. So it truly wasn't really their true first year in the sport, but underneath the Braun name, they were the only team that ever come, after an ownership change that was able to win the constructors championship the first year out.
Wow.
All right. So the last thing that it really didn't have a question for it, but we had talked about the first question is what were the 4 teams that had never had had been under the same name and same more or less same ownership since their very beginning with Ferrari, McLaren was, the first one that was bought, was actually started by Bruce McLaren, who already was well established in Formula One, had already had a sterling career, but decided, one night he had a dream that he wanted to win a Formula One championship in a car with his name on it, his own team. Now, unfortunately, he never got to see the fruition of that dream, and the fact that he was killed before McLaren was ever able to win their first constructors championship. But under the under the leadership of the great Ron Dennis, he was able to take McLaren to absolutely extraordinary heights, in the fact that he was able to find and nurture amazing talents, Lewis Hamilton, Ayrton Senna,
Yeah,
Gerhard Berger, the list goes on and on. Mika Hakkinen, and was able, so that, they're now a 9-time world, with this latest win, they're now a 9-time constructors champion. And then the other one was Williams, which was started by, the great late Frank Williams. And we all know that story, how they went from perennial backmarker to multi-world, constructor and drivers champion, to where they're at now, where they've kind of got, fallen back to the back of the grid. But now, with the inroads that they've made and the
hopefully.
improvements that they've made, I really think that, Williams will, be back, towards the sharp end of the grid at
Yeah,
some point in the future.
I hope so too,
All
man.
right. So let's jump into the news real quick. So, first of all, did you see the comments by the Honda management team about the 2026 power units?
I have not. No, I haven't seen those.
Okay. So apparently the team boss over at Honda made some comments to, I forget which outlet it was, but he was saying, that they were having a lot of issues meeting certain parameters with their 2026 power unit, and that they were really afraid that they were going to be, you know, really struggling when the 2026 season starts.
Hmm.
Now, the whole thing is, though, is that I'm looking at this and I'm going, I don't believe it. Not for a second, because this is Honda we're
Yeah.
talking about. This is one of the most, behind Renault, Ferrari, just simply because of their longevity, and Mercedes. I mean, Honda is up there as one of the greatest power suppliers, in Formula One history. And even if they're having some problems now, I really think that Honda will right the ship, if you will, before we get to the 2026
Oh yeah.
season, because we still have a whole nother season, of Formula One to get through. And I guarantee you that they have a dedicated team, the
Yeah.
teams that are producing this year's power units for Racing Bulls and Red Bull are not the same in mostly. I'm sure that there's some of the top, engineers and designers that they're splitting their time a little bit, but the people who are doing, a lot of the development work and everything for Honda, who are doing the Honda, the 2025 power unit and the 2026 power unit, those are two separate teams. And the 2026 power unit, I really think will I think that they're going to take, and Honda's always been very, very good at finding solutions very, very
Oh
quickly. We
yeah.
saw that
Right.
in their current iteration when they pulled out of Formula One and then came back in. They had, the one disastrous year with McLaren where they had all kinds of reliability woes and everything else. And then the next year they made the jump to, Red Bull and set the world on fire. They were fast, they were competitive. Honda is able to, because of all of the engineering know-how and the passion that Honda has for motor racing. I don't think that it's too much to. I don't think it's something that anybody really needs to be worried about. I
Yeah.
think that Honda will find a fix fairly quickly.
Right. 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 Yeah. It like you said, it's not going to take them any time at all. The engineers that they have there, I mean, just phenomenal engineering. So I don't see them by race day. I don't see this being a problem at all.
No, I don't either. I see them. We might see maybe a few, like little mechanical gremlins and stuff once the car, once they're actually, fitted into a car and they're actually running on track. when they break cover for preseason testing next year, we might see, a few gremlins, or I mean, and we might even see, some early issues with the power unit. But like I said, Honda is one of those teams that will find a fix for those kind of things very, very quickly.
Right, exactly.
All right. So next thing, did you see the news about Las Vegas?
Yeah, time change.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Vegas is now, last year, this last season in 2024, the race started at 10 p.m. local time, which is 1 a.m. Eastern. So it was just, and there was a lot of people, myself and I believe, and you who complained very,
Yeah.
adamantly about how it was too late. It was because of the way that the cooling of the track,
Mhm.
the time change, the fact that, there were people that weren't leaving the track until after 1 a.m. because of the race and things like that. So now Vegas has decided to move the start time forward to be more in line with the other night races like Singapore, which also has an 8 p.m. local start time. So we're going to get the race is going to be moved up by 2 hours. So for us here, like in Texas, where you and I are at, in the central time zone, instead of being at, midnight start time, it's not going to be a 10 p.m. start time,
Yeah,
which, still is kind of late, but it's still way better the fact that they'll be able to get the race in before midnight, so so
exactly.
I think this is I really think that this is a good thing. I think this is really the smart thing for the FIA and Formula One to take, and the Las Vegas organizers to take and bring a much more consistent start time to the race like the other night races. Your thoughts?
I would rather them cancel the entire race personally, but you know, a couple hours that's better. Uh,
Yes.
Versus 10 o'clock. That 10 o'clock was just ridiculous. 8 o'clock is
Yeah.
much better. Track will still be warmish, at that time frame.
Hmm.
So we won't hopefully have as many tire issues and everything else. So uh, I applaud it. I mean, as far as that race goes, again, I'd much rather them cancel it outright. But we are where we are, right?
Yes, exactly. But, like I said, I'm pretty sure that, Vegas has signed a long-term deal. They've put a lot of, the organizers have put a lot of money into the infrastructure and, all of the things that go on with putting on the race, the casinos and hotels along the
Mhm.
strip. It's been a big boon of business for them. So from an economic standpoint, I don't see this race going anywhere anytime in the
Oh
foreseeable
no,
future
yeah,
unless somebody turns the spigot off, and all of a sudden people quit showing up. But as long as people are showing up and they're showing up for the glitz and glamour, of being in Vegas and everything, we're still going to see this race continue. But I'm glad to see that they're moving the time to what I consider to be a much more reasonable start time.
yeah, agreed.
All right, so I got a question for you. Do you think Lewis's shunt in Spain was a good thing? So, quick backstory. I'm sure you probably saw the story, but in his second outing for Ferrari in the 2023 car, Lewis, after went out, did a couple of exploratory laps, came back in, went back out, and coming through the very fast last corner at the Circuit de Catalunya, he put it into the tire barrier. Do you think this is something to be worried about?
Not at all. In fact, I wrote a blog on this, comparing and contrasting, these challenges. But if you look at his career historically, whenever he goes to a new team, he crashes out, but then typically he wins that next year. So I think that's just Lewis pushing and seeing the edges of that car to see where it falls and fails, and
Ding, 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 ding.
where he got it. So the next
Yes.
day or a couple days after, he actually beats Leclerc. So I don't see it as bad
Yep.
at all. Not at
I
all.
don't either. I do not either. I think this was absolutely, this is, Lewis is the fact that it is only his second running in the car and he's already comfortable enough in the car, which, we didn't see in the last two seasons
Right.
at Mercedes. that now he's comfortable in the car, which means he's already trying, already on his second go round in the car, and he's already pushing hard enough to be able to take and find the limit of the car.
Right.
I think is just a total, I think that Lewis's mindset is where it needs to be. I think he's, going to be so re-energized, by being at Ferrari and everything, that, that comfort level that he's already found is just nothing but a good thing. So the fact that, and like you said, when his, first season at McLaren, first test in a McLaren, he put it in the tire barrier.
Yeah.
First test at I think it was either his first or second test ever with Mercedes after he left McLaren, put it in the tire barrier.
Right.
Like you said, but that was the thing, is it's like he just simply had got to the point. It's not that he went in there because, he was trying to, prove something. It's just that he had already gotten so comfortable with the car that he was already trying to find the limits of what that car could do. And he just kind of slightly stepped over it. But that's always been a hallmark of Lewis, is that once he's found where the limit of the car is, he's always able to keep it right there on that fine line. He very rarely will ever step over that line again. So I think this was just an absolutely fantastic thing. And I can't wait to see him in the car more between now and the run up to the first of the season.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So as we've all talked about quite a bit over but we've got a new wrinkle in the Max Verstappen, Red Bull to, Aston Martin rumor mill, that now I'm starting to see that it may not be Lance Stroll getting pushed out at Aston Martin, but now there is rumors of a seat swap where Fernando Alonso may leave Aston Martin and go to Red Bull, so that it vacates the seat for Max Verstappen to go to Aston Martin. So your thoughts on that?
Huh. I hadn't thought about that.
Have you not seen that?
No.
Oh, okay. So yes, so that's a new now it's been from a couple different sources. Some of them kind of like what we talked about, last week with the Daily Mail. Some of them are a little shaky, so you can't, but some of them seem to be coming from some pretty reputable sources. So you got to kind of think that, well, maybe there's something there. I don't know. I think that the seat swap, I think, would be a bad idea. I think that having Alonso and Max at Aston Martin would make it a true, quote unquote super team of having, two multi world champions in the same car. Would just make, it would raise the profile of the team, but it would also, raise the morale of the team. The engineering would, be so much better. They would attract more money in sponsorships and things like that. Not that they really need it with Lawrence Stroll, footing most of the bills, through the Aston Martin brand. But I don't know. I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that it would be much better to just say, Lance, you've had your time. It's time to move into management or do something else.
Right. Yeah, I don't see that happening. They've already promised Alonso not only a long-term contract, but the option to move into a management position inside of Aston. So I don't see him moving over to Red Bull. Not only that, but I'm sure you're aware, Max and Alonso both are talking becoming, having their own team or being part of a team at Le Mans. So they just got their driver and they're ready to go. So
yeah, absolutely.
They're already talking. They're already friends. And, as far as racing together, they're already there. So that move to Aston, unfortunately, we have that dealing with Lance issue for his dad, see what he has to do there. But yeah, I just don't see them moving Alonso out. I hope that's not the case, at least.
I don't either. I think that it's, a lot of people think that just because Lance has gotten a huge amount of assistance in his Formula One career from his dad, and the fact that his dad does own the team, at the same time, Lawrence Stroll is a billionaire. And the thing is you don't get to be a billionaire without at least a certain amount of ruthlessness. And I do believe that he does have enough. And Lawrence Stroll is a very, very intelligent man. You see him in the interviews, like in last season's F1 Drive to Survive on Netflix. You see he's a very, very intelligent man. He's very well spoken, but you can see, you can almost see the gears moving in his mind. It's like he's playing chess. He's playing 3D chess, and you don't get to be a billionaire without a certain amount of acumen in business and knowing when's the time that you have to make the difficult decision.
Right.
And I think he's getting to that point where now, if there's an opportunity for him to have two multi-world champions in the same team, he's going to be willing to make that decision to say,
Yeah.
Lance, you no longer have a drive at Aston Martin. If you want to go to find a drive at another team, I'll help you out, but you're not going to be at Aston Martin anymore. And I think that will happen. There's a lot of people who think that it'll never happen. I do see it happening.
Yeah. I think, honestly, just looking at it from a family perspective, him being the son, Lance being the son, should automatically say, you know what? This is not happening with my dad. I need to go ahead and step back. That I would think that should happen. You know what I mean? That his dad shouldn't have to do that. He should come up to his dad and say, look, I love being part of the team, but I think that if you can get Max here, I'll give up my seat. I'll, go to management, whatever that looks like for him.
Yeah,
maybe just goes on a yacht and has models for girlfriends from that, whatever
I think that
choice is,
yeah,
he should step back. It should be him. Or, it should be Lance.
Yes, I agree. I really, we talked about this. I think it was either the last podcast or the one before that too, also where, Aston Martin has built a hypercar. They're going to Le Mans.
Right.
They're going, into, the World Endurance Championship, as a constructor in the hypercar category.
Yeah.
That I think that would be a perfect place for Lance to go, is he can go be a part of the Aston Martin Valkyrie hypercar program and go into, so that way he still can stay in racing. He can still stay associated with Aston Martin, but that would free up that seat at Aston Martin Formula One. And you're right. He needs to be he really should be the bigger man to say, okay, it's time for me to go in a different avenue.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree with that.
All right. And our last news item for this week. Did you see the news about Johnny Herbert?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay. So after Johnny Herbert was basically shown the door at Sky Sports, he was still doing some media for other outlets, but he had also had started working as a steward for Formula One at the races. Now, the thing is, though, is that up from the very beginning up until now, the stewards have always been a collection of volunteers. They're not paid by the FIA. They're not paid for by the teams. They're not paid for by anybody. They're all just strictly volunteers. But because of his involvement with the media as well, Johnny Herbert, depending upon who's writing the article, he was either made the decision to leave so that he could be more involved with the media side, or he was asked to leave because of his involvement with the media.
Sure.
But that also sparked a bigger debate, and a number of the team principals, including Zach Brown, said that he thinks that it's time that they started having, that the stewards should be a paid position. Wow. That they should have a collection of stewards who are paid, and it should be paid, by a partnership between, the FIA, Formula One, and the constructors. And he said that McLaren would be more than willing to, to kick in to pay for the stewards, which I think is a fantastic idea, because one of the things that you and I and a lot of other people have always talked about is the fact that the application of the rules oftentimes is too inconsistent. It can be, they're enforced one way at one track, with one set of stewards, and you go, a week later to a different track, and the rules are enforced completely different because you've got a different set of volunteer stewards at that particular race. Whereas if you had a panel of paid stewards that went to each and every race, then we can get a lot more consistency in the application of the rules. So I think this is actually a brilliant idea whose time is well overdue. So your thoughts?
Totally agree. We need more consistency at that layer because right now, I mean, it depends on who the favorite driver is of the day. It depends on if they get a worthy penalty or not.
Yes.
I mean, look at K-Mag last year. I mean, and the year before that, and how many Gasly had just because he criticized them. It's just that kind of stuff would go away if it was a paid position and you had more consistency. Not only the consistency, but you have that expertise now. So you have consistency, you have people that are in that position that not only are paid, but they have more breadth of knowledge because they have the experience of seeing so many races versus just one a year or two a year.
Yep, exactly. I completely agree. I think that, personally, I think that what it should do is it should be a collection. And because I got to thinking about this the other day, and this is totally on me. I've not seen this anywhere else, but in my opinion, what they need to do is they need to have 9 stewards. They need to have 3 that are from the FIA, that are the rules makers. They need to have 3, paid positions that are nominated by the FIA. They need to have 3 stewards that are nominated and, are provided by the teams. And it should be made up of former drivers, former Formula One drivers. So there should be 3 of those. And then there should be 3 that are nominated and elected, or provided by the Formula One Association. And then they should have it on a revolving basis so that way they don't burn them out, but they should have 2 of each, so a total of 6 at every single race, and they can do them on a rotating basis so that way not every steward has to be at every single race to keep them from getting burned out and everything, and also to provide perspective and everything. But then that way, because you've got former drivers, you've got rules makers, and you've got the Formula One association stewards in the middle, that between the 9 of them, they should be able to take much more accurately and consistently apply the rules across the board.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're all in agreement on that one.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, I think we're done for today, don't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So that's all our news for this week. So that is all the time we have this week. Tune in next time when Corey and I will be back to fill your ears with all of the latest news, rumors, and much, much more. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott. We're the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.